Hello, people. Oh God. Oh God. Okay. This week, this week I have something a little bit different. It's going to be a Kindle book. Let me see if I do this. The Prince by Machiavelli. Like I said, it's on Kindle. You can't beat the price. The price being free. Now, I don't know about the other. I'm assuming you can get it free on Google or the Apple whatever apps they have. I don't use those as much. Bugger. A phone call,
Wow.
actually? It wasn't even anything. It was just a crank call. Just to ruin my video. What was I saying? Right. Machiavelli. It's got to be free. It's definitely in the public domain, so you'll be able to find it free somewhere. I know for certain. I found my copy on Kindle. You can find a copy of this book. Now, I said a little bit different, and it is different because it's not a book per se. It's more of like a self-help book, right? I don't know how we're counting those. It's not going to be novel. We're not. It's not a novel. They're not a story, but it has some story elements. But more than that, to me, it still has relevance. Real world, current relevance. Now, all right. Let's see if I can break it down. A rating. That'll help. I think if you're a history nut, this is like a 5 out of 5. Weirdly. Not history. What sort of history? If you're into politics, right? If you like to watch, if you're concerned about the debt ceiling, if you're concerned about local elections, any elections at any time ever in the history of the world, it's it this is a book for you. So for those type of people, 5 out of 5. Let's say you're just a reader. I just love books. I'd say maybe a 4 out of 5. There's clearly a voice that comes across, right? You can get a sense of this person who's writing. There are stories in it, but it's not like Shakespeare. It's not beautifully written. There's not as much to sink your teeth into. Clearly, for casuals, I'd stay away from it. Now, if you like to read, but you're not just there for the words, I just want to read elves or spaceships or something like this. If you're just coming off the Expanse, get the Expanse 2 or 3. Avoid this one. It's not like that. Like I said, it's like a self-help book. It's not going to move you along. It's not going to do anything for you, but it's not trying to do anything for you. So for those people, it'd be like a 2. It barely qualifies. So we're in a weird spot, I guess, for our channel, in that we've never covered anything quite like this. I don't know how many self-help books I will cover, but I also don't know how many self-help books are as influential as this. I can think maybe the Book of Five Rings. I have that. I might cover that later. Separate. That's a separate topic. So what's happening here? Like I said, politics. If if you enjoy politics, some people do. It's like a sport. Or if you're highly concerned about politics, read this book. Absolutely read this book. It's not that long. It is free. But what it gives you is a deeper understanding of what's happening. And what's crazy, oh my God. I have a little piece of paper that blocks the time. That blocks the time so that I don't get distracted. And it's blowing because I have a fan on. And then so I get distracted. So I didn't help my cause at all today. Politics. You know, for some people, you wouldn't think that's like, who cares about politics? Well, I mean, it affects your life. So there's a lot of different ways interest can grow in politics. Not, it doesn't have to be life or death for you. It can be life or death. Whatever the spectrum is, this book will give you a greater understanding of what is actually happening. And you wouldn't think someone from, I think, whatever it was, 12th century, 11th, I don't know what, this is way back in Renaissance Italy. You wouldn't think that could be in any way helpful to you. But it can. All right, let me see if I can cover some of what's happening in this book. Because, like I said, we don't have story elements to go over. I'm not going to critique his writing in any way. There's no point. He's clearly getting his point across. Clearly. I also have a new notebook, which is not working with me very well. He, okay, what we have is, what do we have is an emotional topic, right? If you're thinking, I'm like, for him it would be the church and princes. That's what he says. He uses this term a lot. But in his time, there were a lot of princes running around, dukes, lords, this kind of thing. And they were the authority. So, if I insult the church can lock me up. If I insult a duke or a prince, they can lock me up, banish me, this kind of thing. So, right, like in our time, it would be like our major issues, right? Race, abortion, religion in the classroom. These kind of big issues that get people riled up. So now imagine somebody presenting themselves and talking callously about those issues, right? Like you would say, the black vote cares about, let's say, I'm making something up now, don't get offended, but this isn't real. I'm just as an example. The black vote only cares about celebrities, so we need a celebrity to get the black vote, and then we'll win Illinois, right? These conversations are happening. Political advisors are telling this to politicians, right? He does the same thing in his time with probably the same stakes, because if some of these words were heard by the public would freak out. They'd say you're racist or whatever they want to do. Ye old cancel culture, however you want to look at it. So he talks very frankly, very callously about large issues, right? He at points he's like, I'm going to tell the prince how to act. And you might get offended by that. But this is, the knowledge that I've learned, and that's the only gift I have to give you. And I'm not meaning it in any kind of a way. But here's what you should do. Here's the examples of people who didn't do what you should do. And here's the negative that happened to them, right? What he's trying to get across to, I forget who he writes this to, but what he's trying to get across to this prince, he calls everyone in power a prince. So if you substitute prince for mayor, city council member, manager, governor, president, however, whoever's in charge, it will start to apply itself and you'll start to reap the benefits. But he calls them princes, right? So he's like, whoever this prince was, he's like, the point isn't just to get in power, but it's to maintain that power, right? So what's the point of conquering the world if you can't then rule the world? There was no point to it. The end result was, the Senate stabs you, right, Caesar? So he thinks in these terms. And then he'll talk in broad brushes. What does he say? All states, all powers that have held and hold rule over men have been and are either republics or principalities, right? He'll paint this broad brush and then start breaking it down. And so he starts with principalities. These are, I believe various forms of them, but one of them's hereditary, right? Your dad was the king, so you'll be king, and your son will be king, and on we go. And then he breaks that down even more. How do you maintain it? How those people like to be subjects of a king. How they will more readily accept a new king if one comes to conquer. This kind of thing, right? I like it because this comes up in Herodotus as well when you read these sort of old histories. And I believe in the founding fathers of America, where the British did it as well. We're having, I believe, around Cromwell. Great debate on this. We love to have, we think about how governments are going to rule us being the people. People always allow this in some way because there's so many people. If all the people don't want a king, you're not going to have a king long. When the Romans left Britain, they wanted one of the Romans to stay. We'll make you king. We like one of you running this whole thing. And sort of they've kept that throughout the years. Other places don't. Right? So I like that we get the... No, in history, we'll have waves of these debates as to the nature of government and which ones work best. Then we get waves of introspection. That's what Machiavelli's doing here. Instead of talking about what works, he studied what's been and what hasn't been. And then tries to glean some sort of useful information out of that. Then he wrote it down and gave it to a prince. Here, maybe you can rule better, right? It's a useful tool. It's very cool. And like I said in it, he'll mention examples from, what is this? Louis the XII, King of France, Romulus, Moses. He brings in people who have ruled people and then breaks down where they succeeded and where they failed and what he thinks they should do to be better at it. He mentions colonies. And it's, again, like I said, the frankness of what he's saying, I think, is why it works so well even to now. He will say something like, hold on. Sorry again. I tried to go without any cuts. I tried to go without any cuts and it didn't happen. He mentions colonies. He's like, okay, if you take over such and such area, a principality, he deals with these early on, you could hold an army there, but it costs everyone at your house, at your home state, money. Then they get mad at you. Then everyone at the new state is mad because there's an army there, because armies act like they act, and they eat a lot, and they're invasive. So now, you've depleted your supplies, on both sides, made enemies out of everyone, and it doesn't end well for you. He goes, so what he likes is colonies. So you have a new area, you make 2 or 3 colonies around it. It's a way to hold some troops, but it also gives you peoples that are on your side. And he goes, and the only cost to this is that those people maybe don't like you. But what can they do? They're now poorer and they're separated. So they can't group up and do anything to you. It's this overarch of a concept where we're not thinking of individuals anymore. We're only thinking in terms of units and consequences. And a prince, a king, a president thinks in those terms. Like, you may do this, yeah, but it's only North Dakota that doesn't like you if you do that. And what can North Dakota do if you win the rest of the South and California, right? You think in these sort of broader based terms to maintain that power. It says, I'll use some quotes from him. ought to be well treated or crushed. Again, we're not thinking humanitarily, right? He says the Romans knew that war is not to be avoided, but is only to be put off to the advantage of others. In politics today, right? Like if you watched a campaign today, something comes up in that campaign. What did the campaign advisors tell the candidate to do? You even see it in movies, but it's real life where they go, you got to get out ahead of this. If you don't come out and say, look, I kicked a dog when I was 15, then the enemy's going to paint it in a way that's going to hurt you. Right? And that's where you start to, again, you'll read through this whole book. It'll float in your head, and then these images from everyday life will start to hit you in the face, where you start to see the benefits of what he's saying. That's what's really cool about it. Because that's what he's saying. And for him it was a war where dudes are fighting with dudes, right? But he goes, if I know if I know so and so's a problem, I need to deal with that now. Because now I have the most strength. He has the least time to prepare. And, if I lose, at least I lost on my terms. Because who knows what the future's going to bring. Right? I like this. He talks about how France messed up. He brings up a lot of Italian stuff where one of the kings tried to come in and take Milan. And through a course of events, it ended up being where he brought in Spain and empowered the church. And he says he messed up in doing this because all it did was make the church and Spain strong enough to throw him out of Italy, which is what happens. So he doesn't treat, in his time, the church would be a big deal. But he talks about it in a way that it's not any different than any other state. It's whatever has the power is what the prince needs to deal with. And thinking about it conceptually is what allows it to be moldable to a modern world. So even if it's just a work environment, you understand that your boss has the power. And so you have to then know how that power will function if you're a subordinate, or if you're in charge, what to do with that power to maintain your job to be the most effective. It's really kind of wild, and you wouldn't think it applies, but I swear if you read it, it applies more and more day to day. And then he gets into republics, which is pretty cool as well. A republic being people who live by a vote. There are some areas throughout history, I believe the Greeks, the Romans had a senate. People who are used to saying, well, I vote on this and then it becomes how I am treated. He goes, you have to treat those completely different. He says, he who becomes master of a city accustomed to freedom and does not destroy it may expect to be destroyed by it. For in rebellion it has always the watchword of liberty and its ancient privileges as a rallying point, which neither time nor benefits will ever cause it to forget. I see this a lot in the Civil War. In the Civil War, the South was like, look, we're the same as the founding fathers. We're fighting against this injustice. And it did rally a lot of the South to continue fighting. It's part of the reason it was such a hard fight. They had this idea in their mind that they're fighting for liberty, for their freedoms, right? And it's like, but the idea that you would tell someone, you got to crush them completely. You have to make sure none of that is left. because any root of it. And I'm like, normally people, again, in I'm getting rid of this stupid paper. Let me down again. In normal political conversation, you don't talk in those terms because you'll lose votes in our system. In other systems, you'll get whatever merchants or whoever else is a power around you offended. You don't ever want to offend people. But if you're not thinking in those terms, you're not really running things. Um, I'm like, I was thinking of this a lot. You can, in campaigns, in modern campaigns, this comes up. It ought to be remembered that there is nothing more difficult to take in hand, more perilous to conduct, or more uncertain in its success than to take the lead in the introduction of a new order of things. And then he goes on to say that you have in the old order all the enemies who stand to lose, and as allies, you don't have any strong convictions because the new thing hasn't proven itself to those people who would be your defenders. So when there's an upchuck against you, you get no help basically, and all the resistance. And you'd be like, what is it? The writer's strike in Hollywood, right? The whole establishment of the way things are in Hollywood now are what's fighting against the studios trying to implement a new way of doing business. We want streaming. Let's say we want, the big thing is AI writers, this kind of thing. Ways to make it cheaper. Well, the cheapness means all these people will lose their jobs. And so you see them sort of rise up against that. And right now they're striking. It really starts to apply. It is easy to persuade them. It is difficult to fix them in that persuasion. And thus it is necessary to take measures that, when they believe no longer, it may be possible to make them believe by force. And then he says, because he doesn't leave out wickedness. And again, another unsavory topic. What if I get to my position by killing the last king? And for most people, you'd be like, well, don't do that. Not him, not Machiavelli. Machiavelli goes, well, look through history. X, Y, and Z person has done that same thing. How did they ride those waves to continued success? What is it? Injuries ought to be done all at one time, so that being tasted less, they offend less. Benefits ought to be given little by little, so that the flavor of them may last longer. It's so genius. It's like what is it? Modern Trump, right? Some of you may be tired of hearing about it. I'm not meaning it in a political sense. I'm meaning it in how it applies to this book. So, calm down. The Democrats, by impeaching him over and over and over, what is it? They extended the what offends people. It's re-aggravating his base, and so his base is re-riled up, as opposed to doing everything you're going to do to him in a month and then never talking about it again. Right? You see the errors they make on either whatever side of the political spectrum that you're on. Now you could hear some people say it's justice, it's this, it's that, and I'm like, what the book starts to tell you, and what you start to see, is that the rules don't apply to them. Right? It's a game they play, and only the rules of the game apply. And if you break those rules, you're going to put yourself in a hole. So if you were anti-Trump, you'd want to make your attacks all at once, right? And get it over with so that the enemy, your enemy, doesn't have the ability to use that injustice for his benefit, which he has. If you look at campaign funds raised and such and whatnot, he's benefited by all those impeachments. He's benefited by all the indictments. He's benefited by all these things that the Democrats are doing to try and stop him because they're not doing it right. He talks about soldiers. He talks about you want all troops to be your troops, or basically none at all. Because he says if you have mercenaries, they're just there for money, and they're not going to fight with the heart you need them to fight with. Right? And it'd be the same like if you're a football coach. If you didn't recruit the guys, then it's harder to get them to stick to you, right? So you're going to go through ups and downs, and on the downturn is when you start to lose them. Versus guys you've recruited, guys you believe in, they then believe in you, and that it's a better motivator. He says auxiliaries are always disadvantageous. Lose and you are done. Win and they own you. Auxiliaries being, I guess, there's a trained army, and then there would be, I gather people from my cities, right? And that's just putting new people in charge. That's what is. You don't want to put new people in the game who could then take credit from you. It's all this. What some other ones? What is the other ones I want to talk about? Ah. Okay, this one's fun. He says, "You can't always act right." Oh no, that's me saying it. He goes, "On for them it was religion, right? But for us, it would be what's politically correct. It is necessary for a prince wishing to hold his own to know how to do wrong and make use of it or not according to necessity." Right? So he says, right, like he takes a moment in his time to say, all respect to the prophets in the Bible. Right? They were doing God's will. They were in charge, but then they all end up dying. And he's like, well, that's good for them. Much respect to them. But I'm not trying to have the prince die. I'm trying to have him rule for the end of his life and then his son to rule, right? So it does no good to always be right. So if and you'll see politicians do this over and over, right? They run saying, I will be X, Y, and Z. I will be 100% anti-abortion or pro-abortion. Then they'll get in office and you'll see them like vote against the cause that got them in. Literally against the cause. And then 2 months later, they're back on the cause. Right? And people always try and point out the hypocrisy. But it's never what gets them out. And you're like, why? And again, the book will start to explain why. People are fickle. And they'll forget. And they're in the moment. This kind of thing. His most famous quote. He asked the question, whether it is better to be loved than feared, or feared than loved. And he says you want to kind of be both. You definitely don't want to be hated. But on the whole, he said the safest one is for a prince to be feared. Right? Shocking then, I guess shocking now. And again, you could look at politics of today. You might say that was Trump's problem. Why didn't he win re-election? He didn't win re-election because the Senate wasn't afraid that he would do anything to them if they voted him out. In the end, I know we have votes, but in the end, the Electoral College puts you in office. That's just the facts of our system. So, I'm not here to argue whether the vote was stolen or not. That's irrelevant for the prince. If the prince had properly, Prince being Trump, if Trump had properly made the Senate afraid of him, they would have put him back in office, irrespective of what the vote said. You see? He didn't. The people loved Trump, but that love didn't get him a W. And the W is the only thing that matters in politics. It's the only thing that matters when you're in power, staying in power. Whatever thing you think you can do good or bad can't be done if you don't have the seat, the scepter, the crown. You see what I mean? But he goes on to explain. He's like, why is this the case? And you have to know why to know what you're doing. It's quotes. And I love this quote, actually. I think of it a lot. Because this is to be asserted in general of men, that they are ungrateful, fickle, false, cowardly, covetous, and as long as you succeed, they are yours entirely. They will offer you their blood, property, life, and children, as is said above, when the need is far distant, but when it approaches, they turn against you. And that prince who, relying entirely on their promises, has neglected other precautions is ruined. Right? I swear I think of that all the time. You'll see a sports team, the fans absolutely love you when you're winning. The moment you lose, they hate you. Fire the coach, put the backup in, everyone's an idiot. You go back to winning, back to the love. And again, it works in politics as well. You had all these people, and again, this is not a statement on politics, but on the machinations of it. And I think you can see this no matter what side you're on. You could see a lot of, let's say, pundits, talking heads, people in the YouTube sphere grabbing onto Trump's coattails for good or bad. They might say, I'm all anti-Trump, or they might say, I'm all pro-Trump. And then here in the Biden years, you'll see them wavering one way or the other. Because when it was winning, when it was making them money, when it was getting them views and subs, they're all for Trump. And the moment they think it's going to get hard, it could cost me, they drop it. They're fickle. You can see the fickleness in people. It's completely current to today. And I'm assuming you could see this in a workforce as well. If you tried some new kind of method of doing, like people talking about working from home, right? They're all gung-ho at first, but the moment, the company makes a little less money, they're starting to throw people overboard. And then the last one, I'm gonna go with this one. Now I swear, I feel like I'm, it might feel like I'm just pulling quotes out, because I sort of am, but to me they explain a lot. And also, I'm leaving out a lot of the intra-stories, because it would be how such and such became king of Syracuse back in ancient Greece, or how Romulus did such and such. Right? There are a lot of these. After he gives a point, he'll do a story about history and what works and what doesn't, to solidify the point he's trying to make. And then you will then read that, and then somewhere in your daily life, I'm telling you, you'll see it in action in some place. And then you'll be like, I know what's about to happen-ish. And then what about to happen happens, and you're like, I'm like a weird prophet who can see the future. It kind of feels like that in a weird way. And again, I'm going to read it, and it's going to sound a kind of a way. It's a politically incorrect way to, but don't take this as me thinking this about women. It's from the Renaissance England, or I mean Renaissance Italy. But even don't take it as how he would treat women, right? Because he's using it purely as an analogy. Okay. He says his quote is, "Fortune is a woman, and if you wish to keep her under, it is necessary to beat and ill use her. And it is seen that she allows herself to be mastered by the adventurous rather than by those who go to work more coldly. She is therefore always womanlike, a lover of young men, because they are less cautious, more violent, and with more audacity command her." Again, I think of this one a lot, not in the terms of literally. I'm not saying treat women that way. I think I've made that clear. But in history, right, when we're thinking mythologies and this and that, Venus is always seen as a woman because she is more dynamic in her temperament. In one moment, everything's serene and great, and the next moment, spitting fire, laying waste, right? Versus male characters who are fairly consistent in their thinking. And you're like, then they get played on by that inconsistent of the female, right? So if she's happy, he can do his thing. But in the middle of doing his thing, she flips and she burns out every plan that he had, right? It's a generality. It's a generality. But if you hang on to that in your mind about fortune, you see it play itself out as well. You'll see athletes who, as they age, maybe start to take less chances. Some of it's they think I can outthink my opponent, but in some of it's I want to save myself for the playoffs. I don't want to risk injury. This kind of thinking, you're not thinking as dynamically as you should. And then when it comes playoff time, you see they can't flip the switch anymore. They needed to be thinking always with the recklessness and not concern themselves with injury. And that the younger who's flying around, who's not twisting his ankle, just doesn't end up with a twisted ankle. Napoleon said this at one time as well. He's like, he did some kind of dramatic thing where he's not sure if it's going to work. And his other aide-de-camps, that's what they called him, were like, shouldn't we stop? And he's like, we're this much in already. We're this much in Fortune's hands already. We might as well lean on her a little bit. Right? You see it throughout history. And I'm assuming, now again, I don't have all the campaigns in my mind. But if you watch a political campaign as well, it's the same. Trump, it's the one that's most recent, but Bill Clinton did the same. If you're tired of hearing about Trump, where he went on Arsenio Hall and he played the saxophone. And back then, politicians didn't they didn't undo their tie at all. They wanted to always be what they are. But he let loose. He put shades on. He played the saxophone, and that was a risk to be. You're like, I don't know how the voter will take that. Well, when you risk it, it seems that fortune rewards that risk, that the chance that you're taking. So it plays in modern politics as well. Trump said how many outrageous things that every pundit said was going to sink the ship, and it didn't, and he won his election. You have to maintain that vigor. And that's why I say the book, again, once you read it, it plays so much in your mind watching politics, or if you're not into politics, if you watch your boss or his boss or mayors or police chiefs, however you want to look at whoever's in charge, the words start to play in your mind and you start to understand more what's happening around you. He ends it, I have to fight this little notepad so hard. It's like a spring. He ends it with the life of how do you say that? Castruccio. I think that's how you say it. And for him, it was an Italian who embodied everything he thought you should. It's a great little biography. It puts into practice all the things you read in sort of an example of a living example. And then he sends you off, right? And then the book's done. It's not that long. But I do promise that if you read this book, if you're of the mindset to read it, even for general knowledge, right? I'm going to read this and then practice watching some politics and see what I think. You'll see what works, what doesn't. You'll see how consistent the book is. It's actually very, very fun. But it isn't a story per se. So keep that in mind. I'm not sure how well I think I did a good job. It's hard. It was hard in my mind to get across what I'm trying to get across. Because it's such a living book for as old as it is. You end up with these ideas rattling in your head that present themselves over and over again. It's really very interesting. All right. It's also free. So go check it out. Ad time. I'm going to cover just one book this time in the ad. It's, which one is this one? String Theory. In this book, I decided to write a narrative, a storyline in which every conspiracy theory is real. And what would that mean? That's my idea behind this book. So if you're into conspiracy theories, you can sort of read it and see how many of them you can pick out. Go give it a try. I liked it. It was fun. Thank you all for listening. I'll be back next week.